Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you are having a great week. For those of you that are new, my name is Susan. I am a freelance fiction editor specializing in science fiction, fantasy, and romance. So this week's video is actually a little bit unplanned. I saw a thing online that sparked my brain, and I thought it would be a good topic of conversation for those of you that are thinking about going into not only the self-publishing realm, but also the traditional publishing realm, and thinking about being a hybrid author. And the question that came up was, should you self-publish first? And now this person that gave this advice online is an author who had self-published first, had seen great success with it, and their recommendation was definitely self-publish first because you're going to make more money and you're going to have more creative control. Now this person wasn't necessarily wrong, but there's a lot more complexity to it, and there's a lot of pros and cons that I felt like weren't addressed, and so that advice might be a little bit misleading. So for those of you that are in this same situation where you're considering wanting to go into publishing both on a traditional level and a self-published level, so being a hybrid author, and you're wondering what first steps to take, I thought it'd be helpful to discuss it. There are a lot of really great examples of authors that have done this successfully, both starting out self-published, so authors like Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, which later became traditionally published and went on to be a movie that had Matt Damon in it. Highly recommend it. Matt Damon is beautiful. There are also a number of authors that started out in the traditional sphere, like Carly Phillips, who was a very well-known romance author that was traditionally published, who has slowly transitioned into the self-publishing world, especially as that's grown bigger and more popular. So there is no right answer. It really just depends on what's right for you. So let's dive into this advice that this person gave. So their argument was you should go self-publish first because you're going to make more money and you're going to have more creative control. So let's start with the money first. The question is, are you going to make more money by being a self-published author than go the traditional route? And the answer is maybe, and it could be maybe the other way as well. There are pros and cons to each side. If you go traditionally published, you are not going to get as high of a percentage of each book that you sell, because a part of that is also going to the publisher. So you are going to get a higher percentage of each book sold if you self-publish. That is true. But what this advice online didn't go into detail is part of that is because publishing is a business. Certainly they want to make money. They want to keep in business so they can continue to publish great books, but they're also shouldering a lot of that cost. They take care of the editorial costs, the cover costs, the production costs, and marketing and publicity and everything like that. On the self-publishing side of that, you are going to make a higher percentage off of each book that you sell, certainly because there's not that third party in between you. But there is more upfront costs. So depending on how much editing your book needs, whether you're going to go through a developmental, a line edit, a copy editor, you're also going to need probably a proofreader, a formatter. If you want to know more about the order of this editorial process, I made a video you can check out about the typical editorial process for if you're going into self-publishing or traditional publishing. Highly recommend you check that out. But in any case, either way, there's going to be some upfront cost to you on the self-publishing side to get this book ready for publication, and that includes editorial, cover costs, everything like that. So you're going to be out that money first before you start making money from the self-published book being out there. So it's going to balance a bit. So it depends on how you want to go about that. If you're okay with the upfront cost and you want to be seeing a higher percentage return on each book sale, self-publishing might be the right avenue for you. If you want more of that expertise to be sort of bundled together for you, you would rather work with a publisher that's sort of a more all-inclusive package to be able to get your book ready, but you're going to see less of those returns because of it. That is a consideration, and you may want to go the traditional way first. The idea that you're naturally going to make more money because you are self-publishing isn't necessarily true, and that's even before you throw in the consideration of advances, which is a whole other discussion, which I'll do a video on, as well as pricing. So the way that the market is working right now, if you self-publish, generally the prices are skewing lower, anywhere from $3 or $4.99 to 99 cents or free, versus if a book is being traditionally published, generally it's a bit more expensive. They're able to charge a bit more because they are well established. There is that trust between the publisher and the buyer, the reader, that this is going to be a good book that they'll most likely enjoy, that it's going to be well put together, It's going to have very few errors, things like that. So they're charging $6.99, $7.99, $8.99 or higher. So while you may make less of a percentage on each book sale, if the price is higher, again, that might balance out a bit more. So it's all something for you to consider as you decide which way you want to go first. No way guarantees revenue. No way guarantees the success of your book. It really just depends on where you're at and what you prefer. So now let's dive into the second aspect that this advice brought up, which is creative control. Now, they didn't go into really specifics, but I would imagine this breaks up into 3 separate components: creative control of the story, of the cover, and of the outreach. So let's dive into story first. So you're going to have an editor on the traditional publishing side of things that's going to help make your book stronger as far as what they think will sell and do well in the market. What's going to reach the readers best? This isn't necessarily going to match with how you envision your story going. So the question is, do you have more creative control making the story go the way you think it should if you self-publish? Yes, definitely, because you can self-publish whatever you want. You can have it be a romance that absolutely has no happily ever after, and if that's the way you wanted your book to go, no one's going to stop you. So that's certainly true. But I think it's a common misconception that editors are going to force you to change things in your story. The editor and author dynamic is very much a partnership. And while they're going to push you to really make the book what they know can do best, you certainly have the right to say no. I have worked with a number of authors, both in my freelance time and in my traditional publishing time, where I gave them advice and they decided not to take it, for better and for worse. The book needs to follow what you are passionate about and how you think it should go. Now, of course, if you turn in a 300-page manuscript that goes absolutely nowhere and they don't think that they can sell it and you're not willing to change it, traditional publishing, there is a contract, there is always a risk that they are going to say you're not holding up your end of the bargain, certainly. But it would have to be a very desperate situation. I mean, you would have to turn in an absolute horrible book that they don't think they can sell to do that. So they're not going to break their contract over whether or not you wanted your character to do this or do that. So it's something that while story, yes, they're going to have input and influence, it's not necessarily the end-all be-all of control that I think comes across as a bit of a misconception when you think of traditional publishing. Second is your cover. So now this is something that obviously, if you go the traditional route, the publisher is paying for, they're putting together, they're either buying the stock images or they're hiring people to come in to model for this cover. They do always, in my experience, reach out to the authors, get feedback from them on, how do these characters look? What is their vibe? What do you have ideas on that you would like to see? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come up with something that you absolutely adore or that you would think would work best. And as the publisher, they are going to have the end say. Now, they do work with authors. They'll send you comps. They'll see what you like. They do want your feedback. They want that to be that partnership. But in the end, they're also dealing with their sales and their marketing team who have that one-on-one knowledge, not only with the readers, but with the buyers, with Barnes & Noble, with Amazon, with these retailers that you want to be in to really extend your reach and see what they're going to react to, what they think is going to sell best. So it is a bit more of a give and take. Again, you are going to have full control. If you go the self-published route, you can hire all of those people, you can make it exactly what you want, but you are probably not going to have as much reach and you are going to be out that cost up front versus having the publisher pay for that. So it is a bit of a give and take. And then the third thing, as I just mentioned briefly, is outreach. So what I mean by creative control of outreach is where you want to see your book once it's published. Where do you want it advertised? Would you dream of it being in Entertainment Weekly? What conventions do you want it to be at? What do you want to see as giveaways? Things like that. This is stuff that, again, the internal marketing and publicity team might ask your input and everything like that, but they do have a specific budget for your book and for all the books they're publishing. So it may or may not work with the vision of what you had for your story. So if you want that control, certainly you should self-publish because then you can control that outreach, try to get it in wherever you want to go. But obviously, publishers that are used to working with certain outlets with certain conventions, things like that, might have an easier time getting you there than you would as an individual. So it's that balance that you want to see what's more important to you. Do you want to make sure you have the control to do all those outreach, even though it might mean less of a success rate of getting into those higher level publications or cons? Or would you rather have the risk that maybe they don't want to spend the money putting you in Entertainment Weekly because those ads are expensive, but you might be able to have a lot of other outreach that you weren't expecting because they are well familiar with what works and how they can reach out. So now there's one final consideration I want to bring up outside of money and creative control that you should consider when you're thinking about whether or not you want to traditionally publish or self-publish first. The biggest thing that I don't think people generally talk about is when you want to do traditional publishing, they are looking at not only your book, but they're looking at you and your author brand. So if you have already self-published, you have an existing history, you have an author sales history, you have a brand that you are bringing to them thinking that that is going to add to their list. And it could be fabulous. Like we talked about with Andy Weir, he obviously had a phenomenal following, a great book, and something that they thought that they could push into the next stratosphere. And they did a great job with it. But if you self-publish your book and it doesn't quite work, it doesn't find its audience, it doesn't do quite well, that could be reasoning for an agent or a publisher to maybe say maybe you're not the right fit for them. So it is a bit of a work against your publishing career if you go the self-publishing route first and it doesn't quite work out for you. Now, the caveat to that is that's not always the case. There's a lot of different instances where you could change your pseudonym, where you could go into a different genre, maybe your writing style changes, things like that. So there's always new ways to pivot. You should never let that deter you or slow you down, but it should be in your consideration when you're thinking about whether or not you want to self-publish or traditionally publish first and what order that should happen in that's best for your publishing career moving forward and what you want overall. All of this is a very long way to say it really just depends on what's most important to you and how you want to start first, because either way can be successful and either way cannot work as well as you wanted it to. So if you're the type of person that, yes, you want to be a hybrid author, but you lean more towards wanting control, you just also sort of like the idea of having a publisher as well, that added revenue, you should self-publish first. If you really like the idea of just being able to focus on your story, be able to, write what you want to write, and you have a publisher that's interested, and, if you can throw out a couple of self-published books, do some publicity and marketing on your own, but really your focus is on the traditional side, maybe go traditional first. Or if you're not sure, start doing research and seeing what works best for you. There's a whole lot more that goes into this. Certainly there are considerations all over the place as far as what you want to think about as you go through this. Definitely check out my videos on self-publishing versus traditional publishing, the editorial workflow. There's a lot of great information in there that you'll want to consider when you start to decide how you want to lead your publishing journey. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. And until next week, keep writing.